a few words of introduction about Amanprit. She's a London-based curator and educator with a focus on commissioning performance-based practices and collaborative approaches to working. Her current work includes organising the inaugural Biennale programme for Brent in London and co-curator of the 2021 Boras Art Biennial in Sweden. She's the co-founder of the curatorial collective DAM Projects between 2014 and 20, whose work supported underexposed artists, art scenes, discourses, and socio-political debates in the UK and internationally. Other previous roles include Interim Curator at the Wysing Arts Centre in Cambridgeshire, Public Programme and Residencies Curator at Camden Art Centre, Project Manager for the 2014 Folkestone Triennial and the 2012 Frieze Foundation and 2012 Frieze Foundation projects, and Assistant Curator at Liverpool Biennial of Contemporary Art. She's a curatorial practice tutor at Curating Contemporary Art MA at the Royal College and a visiting tutor on the BA Fine Art at Chelsea College of Art. And she was a trustee of Catalyst Arts between 2017 and 20. So thank you again for joining us. I'm going to hand over to Amanprit and hopefully you'll do a few words of introduction for Savinder and we can pick up any points at the end if you have some questions. So thanks very much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Ingrid, and thanks for that introduction. It's so nice to see lots of names, people I recognise, so a big thank you for joining us. So I think the thing to maybe say at the start is me and Savinder had a conversation and I asked Savinder, did she want me to read out her biography, and Savinder, you said no. So what I wanted to do was maybe kind of start at a space of just telling you what our relationship is. So we started our conversation, and it's a really early conversation. It started just before Christmas when I received this invitation. So we're very much at the start of getting to know one another through our work. So the space you'll share with us today is one where we'll be thinking out loud and being in conversation with one another, but that's with all of you. So please do submit any questions into the chat and I'll pick those up as we're going along. So if I was to talk about Savinder's sort of work in one paragraph, the things that I've been thinking about is, I guess, the kind of grand narratives and ideas of being a pioneer and embodying what a pioneer is. And I see that in Savinder's sort of work played out in both an earnest and playful way, but ultimately I see it as a device to enter the work and perhaps look at the world sideways. And then the works look to early experimentations of moving image and film and the kinetic, but really what the works are doing is occupying a more expansive space. And within that, our early conversations have looked at the idea of breath, the symbol of like flatfish, and also thinking about the histories of an object such as the pineapple. So what will happen now is Savinder's going to give a presentation and then we'll go into in conversation. But I'm handing over to you now, Savinder.
Thank you. So I thought I would talk about the movements of my thoughts rather than talk directly about the work in the exhibition, because I appreciate that everyone's got Zoom fatigue. So I'm going to try and hold your attention as much as I can. So, movement of my thoughts. Why, when we look at a succession of still images on a film screen, are we able to see a continuous moving image? Why, as you see me now, do I appear to be moving? 120 years on from the birth of cinema, and we're none the wiser as to how moving image actually works. And so I'm really captivated by this mystery, this gap in our knowledge, this space of observation and space for our imagination. For a long time now, for maybe around 11 or 12 years, I've been imagining that I'm a cinema pioneer. To the point at 2021, I am one. I am a cinema pioneer. And I really enjoy studying the interplay between the moving and the still. To me, they're not separate entities. So I'm just going to share my screen now so I can share some images. So it was Western physicists and scientists who first became the first pioneers of cinema by conducting experiments into how we perceive the world as moving. Am I the reincarnation of the French cinema pioneer, Etienne Mouret? I, like him, have studied the movement of animals in water. I am fascinated by flight, and I observe my breath. Originally a physiologist, Mouret observed movements in the human body, including respiration. After studying respiration, Mouret developed chronophotography, using it, amongst other things, to study the movement of animals. Chronophotography allowed several successive images to be captured on one single photographic plate from a fixed viewpoint. This was revolutionary at the time, and it is the precursor of the film strip that we know today. At the time, Mouret was studying the movement of various animals. Britain was sponsoring international exhibitions, along with other nations such as France. And in these exhibitions, colonial power was showcased. In 1886, the British public frequented the Colonial and Indian exhibition in South Kensington. This was a 6-month-long exhibition, and the exhibition celebrated the wealth and power of England at the height of the empire. Dozens of Indians were imported to serve as living exhibits, described as artisans, craftsmen, and the children of the Mother Empire. But it turned out that these craftsmen were actually inmates of an Indian jail. The public observed them with fascination. So at the time, the public were looking at these craftsmen, supposed craftsmen. In a similar fashion, Mouret was studying the movements of animals such as the swimming skate. And he said of this study, the difficulty arises in keeping the flatfish, not the flatfish, the fish, flatfish in my head, in a convenient position so as to show its movements of natation clearly. To make it execute its proper movements, an apparatus was used for holding the animal. The fish is held immovable by 2 points of attachment. The skate can neither advance or recede, but it can use its lateral fins as much as it chooses. Nevertheless, it seldom takes advantage of this liberty and only moves them when it is irritated. We have found the most successful way of doing this is to scratch it beneath its tail with a stick. A curious result follows. Projectionists of early film used to linger on the still frame before cranking the projector. This electrifying juncture point between the moving and the still held the viewer's attention, creating a gap, a pause, a space, a blink. The duration of a film projected using a film projector is half black space and half image, due to the shutter interrupting the film strip as it passes through the gate. And this creates the illusion of movement and eliminates flicker. But what happens in this black space, in this gap, this pause, for an hour-long film, half an hour of that is black space. The pineapple plant, Ananas commosis, flowers only once, and it takes between 2 to 4 years to produce a pineapple. When picked, the fruit refuses to ripen. The pineapple will not be rushed. As the pineapple grows slowly, the flatfish lies on its side on the seabed. It remembers its younger days when it had eyes on either side of its head. It was so easily distracted. As a fully grown adult, its body has flattened and one of its eyes has migrated towards the other. Now both eyes lie on the same side of its head, looking up from the seabed. The flatfish observes the world slowly with sharp attention and focus. Both the pineapple and the flatfish lie close to the ground. They have a lot to teach us. They are deeply rooted and balanced. Our human minds are scrambled, particularly mine. Our attention is scattered. It is difficult to focus on one thing. The outside world becomes a projection of what is going on within. The diaphragm is a thin muscle that sits at the base of the chest, that contracts as we inhale and relaxes as we exhale until it gets stuck, that is. We are the only animals on this planet that don't breathe efficiently. We have forgotten how to move. Does your breath go deep, says the flatfish? Are you grounded? Place one hand over your stomach. And as you inhale, feel the stomach rising. And as you exhale, feel the stomach falling. Inhale, rising. Exhale, falling. Inhale, rising. Exhale, falling. Continue that movement of pattern, rising and falling like the tide. Breathing deeply. Breathe slowly. Slow down. Observe your breath. And observe the point where there is a natural pause between the inhale and the exhale. Observe the point where there is a natural pause between the exhale and the inhale. A gap, a pause, a space, a blink. The flatfish and the pineapple simply ask us to pause, to notice, to observe, and pay attention to what is going on in between the gaps. Thanks.
Thanks, Savinder. So that was a really lovely introduction, and we spoke about talking about the work perhaps sort of differently and approaching the conversation with that presentation. I want to kind of start with what you said at the end of the presentation, which was around sort of this idea of being deeply rooted and a balanced approach to the earth, and also the idea of a shallow breath, and really a call to understand the flatfish and the pineapple through those sort of ways, but also you're talking about a practice as well. And I wanted to, that was more of a comment, but I wanted you to perhaps talk about the gaps in knowledge you mentioned and this relationship to early moving image and film. So that's one thing. And also, how much is this era a driving force or a device for what you do?
Okay, sorry, can you just repeat that again? I didn't hear it properly.
Yeah, so I'm wondering about the comment that you made at the end of the presentation, which was about the gaps in knowledge you mentioned and this relationship to early moving image, and how much that period in history is a driving force or a device within the work. And then I'll ask the second question later.
Okay, well, that time period was immense because at that time people couldn't travel around the world. So there's lots of gaps in knowledge that were filled in by things like the moving panorama at that time, and also train travel. So people were imagining what train travel was like, and new ways of seeing as well, because looking out of the train travel train window, the view would speed along so quickly that people had to learn to perceive things in a different way. So there's a lot going on at that particular time that I keep getting drawn back to. And also with early cinema, pre-cinematic devices, people watching what was going on in terms of how images were perceived to be moving along. Yeah, so there's quite a lot of things in there.
And then there's the this idea of embodying and being a pioneer, which is, you know, how you started the presentation as well. I like the kind of performance of that, but I'm drawn to the fact that you're quite earnest about it. And I just wondered if you could just talk about that, because that's very much linked to that period and how histories are told through particular so-called pioneers. And I just wanted to I guess, kind of find out more from you what that kind of means for you within the practice, or is it a narrative that you can use to frame the work that you're exploring and making?
Well, for me, it's very playful to be a cinema pioneer, particularly because at that time I wouldn't have been one. I mean, you saw the images that I showed you of the people who were pioneers at the time, and they were all white men, very privileged. So I say in a kind of tongue-in-cheek way as well that I'm a cinema pioneer, but because I work within the moving and the still, I do believe that I am a contemporary cinema pioneer at the same time. But I'm kind of playing on the fact that, you know, at that particular time, there was a lot of colonial roots. And so I'm kind of using play to maybe think about other deeper conversations or more challenging conversations at the same time through my work.
And so what everyone can see now is images of the exhibition at Pier Gallery. And kind of following on from what you've just said, Savinder, I guess it would be, you know, interesting to hear more about Fade in that respect, because it's featured in the current exhibition. And in particular, I was thinking about it in relation to just themes and elements that you return to in your work. So the kinetic, and also more pointedly, the reference to nature's rhythms and animals in nature. And I just wondered if you could just describe that work a bit and talk more about the imagery used, but also the fact that this was, in many ways, the ways it functions is by the machine immerses itself in water as well. Yeah,
so it's to do with the tide, it's to do with the movement of the tide, but it's also to do with perhaps like 2020, how things shifted from one thing to another, which is why I called it Fade. So memories from a past era. I do believe that we're going into another era right now. Also, that work was based on tidal gauges, early tidal gauges, which measured the tide using a simple weight. So there would be a float in the water attached to a cord, attached to a pencil that was drawing onto a cylinder, the tide. So I was kind of using the idea also of the sea drawing itself, as it were, which is where the water comes in, because the water is actually driving that piece of work. And yeah, so I guess it's to do with those tidal gauges as well, which again comes back to early film and that particular time in history. And also with the tidal gauges, Britain wanted to put them all the way around the world so that it could control the seas as well. So all of the kind of concerns in my work kind of repeat. You may not see that when you see the work. I don't think, for the viewer, I'm not asking them to think in a certain way, but all those things are there if you look a bit further, I would say. again, with the early film, as you were saying, and the movements of early film kind of entering into this work fade at the same time.
And just like staying on fade, the process of, because there's also images that I've seen of the actual mechanisms of how the work operates. And I just wondered how important sort of opening up that side of the practice is, or if sort of encountering it as a kinetic sort of work is how you want viewers to, understand the work, all those sort of very pioneer experimental type drawings that you'd expect, scientists or pioneers to be working on. So there's always this kind of sort of background process that takes place. But I guess I'm asking because I'm interested in your editing process. What's seen and what isn't?
Yes, it is important to have those things in there. I like the simplicity of things and people being able to see how things work at a time when we can't see how things work most of the time. Like, I don't know what my Mac is doing or how to fix it. Or so I like that. And I also think that it kind of triggers people's imagination as well to see something working seemingly simplistically. It allows them to want to believe in a narrative, or believe, just as early cinematic devices would have done. People would have had to have wanted to believe in something moving, for example, a frog leapfrogging over another frog. So for me, it is important that you can see some of that. However, in my video works, some of those, I don't really want you to know how things are working, but I do want you to notice that something's happening, and I do want you to focus. Just like the flatfish, really, I wanted people to notice things in that moving image work, to stop as they walk past pier, to look at the fish, and then in turn at the rest of the exhibition. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think, like I said earlier, it's really us, like, sort of thinking together. So just to everyone who's there, like, the images you've just seen now are of fade, so the work that we've just been talking about. And then another sort of work which makes me think about performance quite a bit in your work, so the performance of an object, but in particular I'm thinking about the Pineapple Orchestra. So, and how the performative gesture is present in your work. And I wanted to ask about just really that kind of journey. I know this sounds cheesy, with the pineapple, like where did that journey start with that work, and how has the work changed from the Pineapple Orchestra and to the presentation at Pier?
Yeah, so it started off in an animation workshop I was giving in India, and somebody span a pineapple on a device that was showing them how to make. And then I came back to the UK and I was like, wow, that was so hypnotic, seeing a pineapple spin. So I made the device and put a pineapple on top. And then the pineapple leaves hit the string of the contraption that I'd made, and made what I thought was a scale. So then, I've got no background in music, by the way, I can't play an instrument. So then it got me onto thinking about making an instrument, and that's all I was thinking about, like making an instrument. But then I started to explore the colonial aspect of pineapples as well, and they've been used as a trophy of power for a very long time. They're on the Wimbledon men's trophy cup. They were used in dinner parties as well as like ornaments. They were never eaten. They cost around £5,000 and they were rented out. So that all came into play as well. And so the project started to get bigger. And then I had a lot of help from different people to make different instruments. And then Colston Hall in Bristol asked me to, well, not asked me, we're looking for somebody to address their name change from Edward Colston, who was a slave trader, but also a philanthropist. And so this work kind of opened up that conversation, I guess, starting off in a playful way. Yeah, so it started off very, very small, and then it got bigger and bigger and bigger, to the point that there was a 16-piece orchestra made up of the community that got involved.
Yeah, and that's what we're seeing.
You're seeing. So all these people are strangers. They were approached by me and the designer of this project, Elena Blanco, and we approached people on benches. We approached people in community centres. We ended up living in Bristol for 2 years, but we didn't know anyone. And the idea was to bring people together that wouldn't ordinarily get together or wouldn't ordinarily come to a music hall, maybe. So it was really like amazing to see everybody together, but also that each person was listening to the other, like deep listening, because you have to deep listen when you're playing music with other people. And I believe that we don't listen enough to each other. So yeah, there's a lot going on. I'll stop there.
Okay. No, but maybe we come back to the deep listening, because gaps in between feel very important to your work, and I think it requires the work requires time, and there's a stillness, and there's an unraveling that goes on. So this idea of deep listening, I feel, resonates across the works. I guess my last question then. So what we have seen images of is the Pineapple Orchestra, and then the presentation at Pier, which in many ways is the images that maybe most of us have seen Instagram the most. And I just wanted to talk to you a bit about that presentation. So in this kind of iteration for Pier, there's quite a sort of formal presentation where the sort of instruments are almost on like plinth-like objects. And yeah, I just wanted to get a sense of how like you got to that point, or was that sort of you thinking, okay, this is a presentation I need to make where it's viewed from the street as well as something that's encountered in the gallery?
So first of all, that work was put on plinths for a show in Bristol, Caribou Projects. And there was a performative element there as well as having the works on plinths. Of course, we're now in a different time where that cannot happen. Otherwise, there probably would have been a performance to go along with the Pier show. But the Pier show came about as an exhibition that might happen over a lockdown, with the doors opening and closing every 2 weeks, which did happen. And so in Pier, the instruments are on plinths facing the window. They're almost like little people, little characters that are looking out at you. Again, so is the Flatfish, which is projected onto the window. So these things are looking out at you. And the idea was to get people to maybe stop and notice, but also based on lockdown 1, I don't know which one we're in now, lockdown 3, people were saying that they were noticing more, and I had a conversation with Ingrid about this, but like how people were noticing birds, or they were noticing the nature a bit more. And so there was that idea of stopping and observing that came from there, that was echoed in the show, I would say, and the way that everything was arranged.
Yeah, I mean, so I can say that I haven't seen the work in the flesh because of the lockdown. So all my kind of encounters have been, via the screen. So hearing you kind of talk about it in that way is, and just having that kind of anecdotal feedback's really important. I guess also more broadly, this goes back to when you mentioned breath, and I hope it's okay for me to say this. I know you have a yoga practice, and connected to this, I am interested in how stillness, or observing that in-between space, is very present in your art practice. I just wanted to, I guess, kind of just ask you to reflect and maybe talk about that a bit more, because that's really where you took us by the end of the presentation as well. You spoke to us about a deep rootedness to both the earth, and that was in relation to the pineapple. So very beautifully you use the pineapple as a vehicle to take us to that point, but also you use like the flatfish as well to think about this idea of the shallow breath. And it made me think a lot about stillness. And I wondered just if you could just talk about that a bit more, and yeah, how like having a yoga practice or bringing that in has supported the practice, which I know you don't always talk about.
Yeah, well, first of all, I think everything is absolutely interrelated. And as much as I'm an artist, I'm also a yoga teacher. What I find interesting is that when I make my work, when I'm actually making it, I am so present, like really, really present. The same way I aspire to be in my yoga practice, but am generally not. So there's something of a yogic practice in the actual making of the work itself. For example, if I'm making let's take the flatfish. I keep saying the flatfish because we're talking about this show, right? But so when I film the flatfish, it's taken me a week to film that. It's a minute long. Because I'm recording something and pulling paper through these different broomsticks. But as I'm doing it, I'm completely in this moment until I just know I've got the right one. So there is that side to it. And I think some of that comes across in the work itself as well. This is another thing. I don't think I'm actually conscious of what I'm doing when I make my work to begin with. It's completely open. I just don't know. I'm just experimenting. And then it's only later on down the line that it starts to shape or form. So for example, for Fade, I was doing a residency on the Isle of Sheppey. Thank you, Cement Fields. And I really didn't know what to do or how to like respond to the island. But all these things started to come together to make the piece of work that what you're seeing here, kind of. Mm. But yeah, I also think that it takes me time as well to articulate my work. So if you ask me again in a year's time what Fade was about, because this is my newest work, I would answer in a very different way to what I would do now. And I think with yoga, yoga is I don't know, my yoga practice has evolved over time, and yeah, it's kind of interesting, I guess, on how we reflect on things, or how yoga influences my practice, or my practice influences yoga, because it's all one, really. Mm.
So I've got one more question, part observation, part question, before I kind of open it up. So
you're good at long questions.
I think what you're getting is sort of an insight into how I kind of think in a really non-linear way. But
I like it.
So you've spoken about deep listening, and it's something deep listening is something I'm sort of both researching and thinking a lot about at the moment, because it's an embodied practice at its sort of best. But why I kind of wanted to bring it up, because you mentioned time, and time is something that pops up for me with your work as well, because you mentioned sort of the flatfish, and actually it was something that took you 1 week, and it presents itself like it manifests in a minute long clip. And I just wondered sort of about that relationship that you have to time, because the work occupies a sort of different sense of time as well. And I just wondered if, especially with the kinetic sculptures and the film works, if that's something that you think about, or again, it's sort of working on a very subconscious level.
Yeah, time is completely inherent in my work. And also going back to the idea of trying to be present, because the idea of being present and being in one moment and not being in the future and not being in the past. And then there's this manufactured time, which is what we know, the 24-hour clock, that actually came from train travel and the beginnings of train travel. And it was because of train travel and train crashes that the world kind of unified its time. So there's lots of different time elements going on in my work. I've mentioned train travel before in this talk, but if you look back at my earlier works, there are quite a few videos that are based around train travel. But yes, there's so many different concepts of time. We're trapped by time. And time is now changing again, you know, because we've got this new Zoom time. I mean, time. I could talk to you for hours about time.
And another conversation for sure.
Yeah.
Quickly, because you made me just think about actually sort of another element, which is about, because you said like, and the work is very interconnected and things kind of, you know, repeat. May they be motifs or sort of ideas are kind of weaved in and out of different works. When does the pineapple or the flatfish come to rest? Like, when is something left behind? Or does that just happen organically? You've worked through something and you think, okay, now I've explored that particular area and I'm onto something new. Or does that happen through time and experiencing something different?
Again, I think that doesn't come consciously for me. It will just happen. I mean, it's the same as you know, if people keep exhibiting the pineapples, they're going to be out there. But if people don't, then they're not. You know, I mean, it is. But also, like, with the development of my work, things like the flatfish will still be there because they'll still be online somewhere maybe. But I don't see my work as in I'm doing one thing and then I'm doing the next thing. It's all kind of feeding one into the other. Again, like my yoga practice and my artistic practice, there's no differentiation, I would say. I mean, I wouldn't have really thought about when the flatfish will end or the pineapple. That sounds like, I don't know, I was thinking about climate change then. When will the flatfish end? And when will the pineapple end?
Yeah, it's more just, you know, yeah, just me probing, just because I'm very much sort of learning, and you know, through talking we're learning about sort of each other. I guess sort of one other thing, because I know I'm kind of going over time a bit, but one other thing is the work that you did in Bristol. How has that changed, knowing the year that we had in 2020? Because I think initially, sort of when you speak, you occupy this particular period in history quite a bit, or you kind of look towards it. And then there are things that are beyond kind of a particular time and space, but you spoke about Coniston Hall, and then also I'm just thinking about sort of Bristol and these colonial sort of histories. How much of that's becoming something you feel that you want to, I guess, kind of explore or occupy a bit more? Occupy is the wrong word, but explore.
More and more, especially considering what's happening. Like with the statue that toppled in Bristol, I was jumping up and down. I mean, for me, that was an amazing moment. That this sculpture was, you know, instead of casting a shadow, quite literally on the pavement, there was this expanse of sky. And I think this is a very exciting point in history, in terms of there is focus on some of these things that most people have, including myself, have been walking past vestiges of this colonial fabric in Britain. So for me, yes, it is something that I want to look more and more into. I have been interested in this for a very long time, but I haven't actually vocalized aspect of my work until very recently. Yeah.
But of course, it's there through. It's there in the pineapple. It's there in, you know, what it might mean to embody a pioneer. Right from the beginning, when I kind of read your kind of biog, and you're a self-pronounced pioneer, I just thought that was kind of a great provocation as well, thinking about who we associate with being pioneers in history, and the kind of, you know, who they are. So that's there, but yeah, I was just interested in how you feel in relation to that now. So thank you for that. Big thank you, everyone, for coming this evening.
Thank you, Amanprit. That was really fascinating. I would urge people who haven't had the opportunity to watch the orchestra perform that you can do that through the QR code standing outside the front of here, or you can do that just on the website as well.